Thank you, everyone. Real quickly, this is going to be sort of two talks in one. I realize that when we talk about archaeology, a lot of time you're going to hear a lot of jargon. As I talk about Mediquim and Mattaquem, all kinds of pronunciations, I thought it would be a good idea to sort of go back and give you and sort of set the foundation for how archaeology in Northeast North Carolina sort of has come about, how we make sense of things, how we categorize prehistoric cultures, because we don't have records, so we have to do it in multiple ways. So you just heard briefly about the culture. I'm just going to go through this real quickly. This is sort of a background. The Carolina Algonquians, these are the indigenous peoples who greeted the first English explorers on Roanoke Island, where the Carolina Algonquians, a subgroup of the maritime adapted coastal Algonkians. As was pointed out, this is a linguistic group. This linguistic group ranges all the way up into Canada and all the way down into North Carolina. How do we know about these people? What evidence can we look at? A lot of what we've been hearing about comes from primary documents, descriptions that were written and left by the English. And the other way is through what I do, which is archaeology. Sometimes those two go together, sometimes they are at odds. So the Carolina Algonquians, where did they live? So based on the early English exploration and the accounts that we're left with, we have this idea that there are several chiefdoms within the territories. And you can make a little bit of sense of this from the accounts, because it's obvious that these groups are similar, yet they're different enough to have some sort of political differences. These chiefdoms varied in size. A lot of that is based on the locations that they're in. Certainly the larger encountered were the Roanoke, back towards the end of the Albemarle Sound, where you have lands and resources that allow for a larger population. So a lot of the variation is based on the geography. But primarily, they settled along rivers, the sounds, streams, confluences of streams and creeks, and bays. So here you can see, it's hard for me to see, but here you can see what I've done is gone about and sort of categorized where these different chiefdoms may have been laid out, and sort of the image on the left, the debris image on the left, kind of hints at some of these larger polities, but we've broken it down a little bit more, and I'll kind of explain why we do that. Within their territories, there are several types of settlements. There are the capital towns, which is where the chief would have sat. There are towns, there are smaller villages, there are farmsteads, there are temporary camps. There's places for resources, acquisitions. So all the sort of components that you would expect from the society. And what I wanted real quickly to talk about with this image, and the reason I put it in, is that a lot of archaeology relies on results. This is the Pamlico River. That's the Punga River with the two yellow, I'm not sure if those work. Yeah. So you got these two yellow signs here. First Colony did a project for Beaufort County. They wanted to relocate the village of Secatan, which is white depicted, for many reasons. One was to bring tourists to the area, to sort of raise awareness of the fact that Secatan was located in Beaufort County. So they had us go through the records and look at the archaeological sites and to come up with a plan to go out and relocate Secatan. Because nothing would be better to have the image of Secatan and then have the archaeology to demonstrate it. So what I did was I went through and pulled all the archaeological site records for the county, for Beaufort County. and plotted them out. In archaeology, a lot of times you think you've been somewhere and you're the first one to do something, and that's never the case. Somebody's always been there before. Somebody's always recorded it prior. And what came about was the idea that you had several different site types. We have the large villages, such as Sikatan. We have the smaller villages that would be aligned with Sikatan. We have smaller farmsteads. Again, going along the idea that these are all sort of kin-based and families. That sort of makes a lot of sense. Then you have areas where they go process shellfish, to gather shellfish. And all that is represented in this one image. So when we looked at the results, it became obvious that the different site types are playing out in this little part of the Pamlico Sound. So we have the larger village of Sikatan and Sakota, as it's shown. We have smaller villages and farmsteads and resource areas. And that's important because what we tend to associate with a village is the depiction that we've been given of the palisaded village of Pomiak and the sort of open town format of Sikatan. But the reality is that these are communities. They may have these areas where things are consolidated at, but by and large, these are communities that support these chiefdoms, that support these small, these small polities. So keep that in mind. Helen went through a lot of these, so I won't necessarily go too far into this. So we've got the ruling class. These are the chiefs. Again, we talked about the political systems that played out on the maps. There's women and their influences on the leaderships, especially considering how the descent is tracked. The different religious beliefs, the conjurers and the priests themselves. Then we have the people who supported and helped support these people, as well as integrate with them. And this is important because these are the people who are sometimes inside, located in the villages themselves. They're in the smaller villages. They may be in the farmsteads. But these are the workers. What did they eat? We have the white depictions of shellfishing. We have the engraving of Sikatan that shows the different crops in different stages: pumpkins, maize. So that's sort of the documentary evidence. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the archaeological record. Prehistoric archaeology has gone through several iterations of how we theorize and how we speak about people that we have no real record for. And one of the ways that it used to be done is to describe things in archaeological phases. The Collington phase, which is named after Collington Island, was first identified by David Phelps in the 1970s. And this is the archaeological correlate to the Algonquian speakers that were here on the Outer Banks. The Collington phase has pretty much a geographic location to northeastern North Carolina. This is a cultural sequence for northeastern North Carolina. We're way down here in the Paleo-Indian, back 14,000 BC, and this is all the way up into the 18th century, and here's the beginning of the Collington phase. So these are different phases along the way, different periods. They're usually divided into early, middle, and late. And these are just ways for us to capture information. So as we excavate sites, we have to be able to interpret it. We have to be able to have the context the temporal context that we can lump these things to. And as we go through and we identify more sites and we collect more information, we begin to build up sort of ideas. This is a slide that I should probably take out because every time I go to explain what it is, no one can see it, and that includes me. But this is there are several hallmarks of a phase. And one of the primary hallmarks of a phase is the type of pottery or the technology, ceramic technologies that is being used. Collington phase pottery is known as the Collington series, again named after Collington Island. It is a shell-tempered ware. It has lots of variations. The shell can be used from oysters, clams. When you move inland, you get freshwater clams. But the primary characteristic of Collington phase pottery is that it's shell-tempered. There are some fine sand-tempered examples, but for the most part, Collington phase pottery is shell-tempered. Now, there are a few attributes that we can use to sort of date that, and that all comes from proper excavation and being able to temporally track how the percentages of these surface treatments. So this type of pottery is not thrown on a wheel. It's made by hand, it's coiled up, and those coils on the outside are annealed or paddled together to give it some strength with different types of surface treatments, not decorations, but treatments. So a lot of times, and I think there are a few examples here at the park, where you have fabric impressed. These are just dowels that are woven and impressed to sort of push those coils together. You have simple stamped, which is a paddle that has grooves. Those are stamped, again, to bring those coils together. So that's part of the technology that makes up Collington ceramics. These are radiocarbon date sort of intercepts for the Collington phase. They've been sort of grouped by locality. I showed you the image that had the different polities or chieftains outlined. It was the one with the colored boundaries. But so here we have them. They're named by the capital town, just for reference. So we have Choanoke. Here are the radiocarbon dates for the Collington series within that locality. Here's Pottery. There are the radiocarbon dates for that. Here's Croatan. There are the radiocarbon dates for that. And Sikatan. Essentially what this does is it brackets this phase between about 800 AD up until the 18th century when it changes. These are radiocarbon dates from shell. A little bit different. No, there we go. So here are the different localities. So I use this as a way to categorize the types of sites and the material and the evidence. It all gets sort of emptied into these different containers for each of these localities, and that way we can interpret what we find. This is sort of the territorial range of the phase. This boundary is based somewhat on historical records, but is primarily based on the archaeology. This is the boundary. These would be Iroquois-speaking groups this way, the Tuscarora, the Meherrin, and the Nottoway. And then here we have what we would call the Carolina Algonquians, which you notice goes up into the southeast portion of Virginia, the Chesapeake, and the Nansemond. So here's some of the descriptions of the material culture. Just going back to sort of examples of what they ate. We have the botanical remains. We have shellfish. This is a great image here because it depicts what is likely a one-time dump. Someone taking out the trash. You've got a piece of Collington pottery. You've got the shellfish. There's some deer bone. It's a good example of that. Again, going back sort of to the description of the pottery. Again, it's coil built, it's shell tempered. We have different surface treatments, fabric impressed, simple stamped, incised and punctate. Here you can see the different sort of decorations that you can see on a lot of the different vessels. And this example here has some of those. We have different types of pipes. So it's all sort of in the ceramic tradition for the Collington phase. And you see a lot of these, just go back to this real quick. Just pay attention to some of these uses of chevrons and horizontal lines, and you can see a lot of that same. These are some of the tattoos that have been depicted by White, and you can see you have use of the same types of symbols. Lots of shell and bone awls, beads, hose. We have the architectural remains, so evidence of long houses. Ossuaries, there's different types. There are large-scale ossuaries where multiple people would be interred at once. There are also single inhumations. Again, there's a variety. This one, let's see which one we got here. So we got one from Choanoke and one from Hollowell, which is also sort of around, I guess that's in Chowan County too. Here we have sort of the interaction spheres. What didn't really talk about this too much, but the Collington phase is divided into 3 phases. The first, a 1, a 2, and a 3. Here from the 1800 to about 1650. This is 1650 is the date when we really get English settlement in the region by Nathaniel Batts and the Virginians coming into the South. That sort of changes that, and then we get into the Collington 3 phase. So during the prehistoric times, even during the contact period, you have these interaction spheres between the different polities, and it's all water-based. They're all operating by water. Those are the highways. Even into the colonial period, they're the highways. So you can see these spheres and how they work and how material culture and how culture itself is transmitted back and forth, east and west, north and south. Okay, this is the second part. Maybe the fun part. The village of Mediquim. There's not really a lot of a description. Lane says the towns about the waterside, and I may butcher some of these, so I apologize to anyone. The towns about the waterside situated by the way are the following. Ooh, what is that? Pishokenok, the woman's town, Cheapenham, Wipomiak, Muskamunge, and Mattaquem. All these being under the jurisdiction of the king of the Wipomiak called Akisco. So, go back to that. So here, debris depicts the village here. This is the Albemarle Sound. The Outer Banks would be down this way, so your north or up is actually west. Here we have what is probably around Edenton. This is the Chowan River, and this is the Roanoke River. So Mattaquem is situated sort of right in the middle. This is Salmon Creek, by the way. Here's some of the different variations of the name. So where's the site situated? Where it's depicted is situated at the very back of the Albemarle Sound along Salmon Creek. Territorially, you can see where this is complicated because some people have theorized that it would have been aligned with Choanoke, the Choanokes, although Lane says the Wipomiak. You can see that these territories are very close to one another. I tend to think Lane was probably correct. Another interesting thing is that this is right on this boundary with these Iroquois-speaking groups, the Tuscarora. So the way archaeological sites are managed all across the country is that there's a state repository that maintains sites, locations, site numbers, descriptions of the sites, and these are the repositories where this information is kept. I mentioned that we did the project for Beaufort County, so we contacted the Office of State Archaeology in North Carolina and said, can we have all the site forms and site records for the sites, for all the sites in Beaufort County? So that's how sites are managed, and that's how we keep an inventory. So the Salmon Creek site, or 31BR168, 31 is the state of North Carolina, that's its number. BR stands for Bertie County. 168, that's the 168th site recorded in the county. So this is sort of a cataloging system. It seems dry, but that's how we give sites numbers. And then we give them a name so that we can sort of set them apart. This site was initially called Salmon Creek site. Is it Mattaquem? Well, the site has been collected for many years. It's in a plowed field, and one of the things that always happens with plowed fields is that they're good spots for collectors, and collectors over the years have visited the site many years. The first professional archaeologist to visit was in 1975. Dave Phelps made a quick visit, a reconnaissance visit, but it didn't do any recording. The first time it is actually recorded is in 1977 by Jack Wilson of Chapel Hill. At the same time that Wilson was surveying Chowan County all along the shoreline, and as was David Phelps, so from ECU. So both these institutions assign site numbers to the same sites. So there's a little bit of confusion when you're looking at some of the sites because they were operating at the same time. I'm not even sure they knew that they were doing the surveys at the same time. Interestingly enough, there was some limited excavation done by Pembroke University in the 1990s, and I'm not sure, not been able to track down what that was all about. It was revisited again in 1999 by ECU, and then finally, in about 2007, 2008, James River Institute for Archaeology did some compliance work. So in the state of North Carolina, whenever you require permits, one of your responsibilities is to, especially if it is a state permit or a federal permit, it requires some compliance archaeology. So you have to assess for cultural resources. So in 2007, 2008, there was a planned development, a very large planned development. You can see this is what it looks like now. Here's Salmon Creek. This is the Chowan River. This development was planned for this area in here. It's a mixture of agricultural fields and pine plantation. But you can see, and I forget the number of houses, but there was a planned development for many homes, an inland boat basin for sailboats. So part of that responsibility for the land developer was to hire a cultural resources firm to go through and survey the area. And that's what Nick Lucchetti's crowd at JRI did. I can't see if you can see this, but all these little itty bitty dots, those are individual shovel tests. I forget how many thousands of shovel tests were dug across this close to 2,000 acre parcel. But during the time, they identified several locations or several archaeological sites that were recorded with the state. As this process moves forward and development is planned to move forward, they have to figure out whether these sites are important enough to protect or suggest that the developer avoid it. And if it can't be avoided, then they have to do what's called mitigation, which is to excavate it. So the phase one, which is that initial shovel testing, showed several sites within the area. But primarily what we're interested in are the sites that were located down on one of these little toe ridges. And all these are some of the surface collections that were made. This represents some of the other testing that was done in the phase twos, which involves stripping. Real quickly, so here's our site. You can see these are all the artifacts that were done from a controlled surface collection. Just real quickly, I wanted to remind myself by putting in plow zone archaeology to talk a little bit about how plow zone archaeology is important. And if you imagine your own home, and you imagine all the rooms within your home, all the stuff that's in your home. So let's talk about the kitchen. So in the kitchen, you have your dishes, your silverware, you have all the things that you need to cook. In your living room, you have furniture, you have your bedrooms, you have your clothes, you store all those things. So there are places within your house that have different types of material. Now I want you to imagine you just slam the door shut one day and never go back. Hundreds of years from now, your house is going to fall in, it's going to fall apart, it's going to decompose. And then one day somebody's going to come along and plow it up. So when they plow it up, they're going to stir up all that context, right? So plow zones are not always the best place for context because those artifacts are out of context. They've been plowed up, they've been mixed, they move around, it rains, they get moved up and down. But the thing is they don't move too far. Most of the time they just move up and down. And so when you're looking at stratigraphy with archaeological sites, you have, especially ones that have been plowed, you'll have this plow zone. It's obvious where the plow goes. And within that is mixed context. Artifacts that you'll have 10,000-year-old artifacts right beside a pack of nabs. I mean, it's just mixed. And so part of the phase two or the evaluation of this site was to do a controlled surface collection to be able to pinpoint where a lot of these artifacts were coming from. So here's the crew. They plotted them. They put flags beside each find, and then they were surveyed in and GPS'd in. And here's the end result. We have all these little things. These down here represent these artifacts, but pulled out by time period. So what we have, this is the early woodland Deep Creek phase pottery. And we've got middle woodland, Mount Pleasant, and middle woodland, Middletown ceramics. Here are the concentrations. You can see it's a little bit of a much more widespread distribution. There's a reason for that, but I'm not going to get into it. And then we get back to the Collington phase, and you can notice that it is focused just right down here. The Deep Creek is focused right down here, but it has nowhere near the same amount of material. The next step in the evaluation was to go through and to assess the stratigraphy. And here you can see the site, Salmon Creek site, is being stripped. The plow zone is being removed, again, because it's a mixed context. It's important, but it's not that important. And what we wanted to see is whether you have intact stratigraphy, intact locations where you do have archaeology that is good context. And here we see some of the features that were exposed during these strippings. This is also demonstrates some of the stratigraphy at the site itself. And here you can see the drawings, the profile drawings for this site, for that test unit. Here's some of the material that came from it, mixture of ceramics. This is a dipper. You can see it's a little cup, this boat-shaped cup, different types of arrowheads. This oddball, which we're not sure what it was. Okay, so that takes care of the compliance archaeology. 2008 happens, the housing market crashes, flat, subdivision doesn't get built. But the same people, fortuitous I guess, who had worked on that compliance project are also First Colony Foundation archaeologists. So as we began to do work at Site X, we decided, well, we should probably pay some attention to the site adjacent to it, which, you know, there's a real good case to say that it is the village of Mediquim. So in 2018, we decided to do a little bit more stripping, but we wanted to be able to figure out why we had that concentration of Collington phase material, the south end of the site. So we put in several trenches two long trenches to sort of identify any architectural features that might stand out. And so we had different things that occurred. We had over this way, the road was obvious, and then you have a lot of plowing, but you can see you have several dark stains that are exposed. So the idea is, well, okay, we can't excavate this entire field. This is also at a point where the property is going to be turned over to the state of North Carolina, so we wanted to be able to do something that wasn't intrusive so that we could leave some more archaeology for future generations to come back. So the next best thing to that is to do something that doesn't disturb the ground. So we conducted a ground penetrating radar survey of that same area. So the trench that I just showed you, this guy here, is right here. This is the road that leads down to a boat ramp. This is a curving line, which we didn't know what it was, but had a good idea. This H-shaped trench is one of the previous trenches from 2008. And so what it looks like we have is a Palisade Ditch. And this is my drawing of a circumference of the Palisade. Encompasses about an acre or so. So we have archaeology from the right time period. We have GPR images that suggest we have a possible ditch, a Palisade Ditch, and we have this concentration that's all down in this little corner here. Real quickly, I'm going to talk about. So that's important for a few reasons. Drawing that correlation between what's on a map and then the archaeology is tough. It takes time, but we can make a few assumptions. One, we do have map evidence of a site. So Debris' map is very specific of where Salmon Creek. He draws it pretty well. He locates the village on the north side of the creek. So we have a good idea, and that's exactly where 31BR 168 is. We have a late woodland Collington phase component, the right time frame. However, not necessarily dated to the 16th century, but it is of the right time frame. Again, remember, this is a time span of 800 AD up until the 18th century. We have possible evidence of a palisade from the archaeology, and then we also have the GPR image that shows this curving ditch. If so, what might it have looked like? I think it's something like this. So we have the village of Pomiak, which is a really good representation of these smaller villages. So this is where the site is. This is the field. This is the corner where all the material is associated with. This is the Palisade Ditch that comes through here. So it's probably a very similar layout to what you see depicted by White to represent the village of Pomiak. These are not large towns. The population maybe 80 to 100 at the most. And within this, you would have still had all these other sites associated with it. You would have resource acquisitions areas. Here's the creek itself portage for canoes, sheltered from the wind. It's a great place for a site. You've got sort of upland areas for crops. And then you've got all the sites that would have existed all up and down, that all sort of centered around this one area. So this, again, going back to the idea of communities, while it is important that perhaps this is a nucleated village, as is evidenced by the concentration of debris and trash that's thrown away by this occupation, the consolidation of the buildings within this footprint, this is still part of a larger community. So when we talk about these towns, let's keep that in mind, that you're not just talking about this, you're talking about the guys across the creek over here. They probably belong. The guys up the creek, the folks over here, the farmsteads, the small farmsteads. So these are communities. So I realized, I guess last night, that my talk was about protecting the site. I guess I hadn't read the title. So I figured I should probably say something about that. Today, the Salmon Creek site is one of several archaeological sites protected by the state of North Carolina within the Salmon Creek natural area. So going back to the compliance work that was done by James River, there were several sites, I believe 5, that made it to the end. They were determined as eligible for the National Register, important enough that they would have to be, if someone really wanted to impact them, they would have to do a lot of work to them. And the Salmon Creek site is one of those sites. The site's importance, first and foremost, lies in the cultural sequence that it represents. We have early archaic, all the way up until, I think I put in here, the 16th century, but you even have tenant farming and stuff in the 19th century. You have those folks located at the same area. The village itself is located very adjacent to Site X, maybe 75 feet away. So there's that importance there with those two connections. However, while the potential is high that this represents the Village of Mediquim, a lot more work is needed just to the site and all the sites sort of that would make up the Mediquim community as a whole. I guess I'm not supposed to take questions, so I'll